Usually when we think about building relationships, we treat it kind of like a bank account, like it's a ledger.
Right, yeah, a ledger.
Yeah, you make a deposit, like you do someone a favor, you bring them coffee, you give a compliment, and you just sort of assume that builds up your balance.
Exactly. And then, someday you might make a withdrawal. You might actually ask for something in return.
Right.
But it's a very transactional way of viewing human connection, really.
Hmm.
We just assume goodwill is, essentially purchased through our own generosity.
But then, you step into the world of behavioral psychology, and suddenly that whole ledger is just turned completely upside down.
It really is.
We're looking at a landscape of human rapport today for this deep dive that is entirely counterintuitive. Like, giving someone something is actually often less effective at making them like you than asking them for something.
Which sounds completely backwards, I know. But to prove just how powerful that flip is, we actually need to look at a guy who was like a master of this back in the 1700s.
Oh, right. Benjamin Franklin.
Yep, Benjamin Franklin.
Yes, the famous Ben Franklin effect. We've got some amazing sources for this deep dive today, going from 18th century anecdotes all the way to modern behavioral science. So our mission today is basically decoding how asking for things shapes how people feel about you.
And doing it ethically, which is key.
Absolutely. So let's start with Franklin. Picture this. You're Franklin, you're serving in the Pennsylvania legislature, and you are dealing with this fierce political rival.
Oh, this guy is genuinely hostile, like actively going out of his way to make Franklin's life miserable on the legislative floor.
Right. So normal logic says, okay, Franklin should either just ignore him, fight him, or, try to win him over with a grand gesture, like a big gift.
But he doesn't do any of those things.
Yeah.
Instead, he sends a letter to this rival, and he asks for a favor.
Which is wild.
It is. He asks to borrow a very specific, really rare book from the rival's private library.
And the rival is probably just, a bit surprised by this.
Yeah, probably very confused. But he agrees. He sends the book. Franklin reads it, returns it a week later with this gracious thank you note.
And the result?
The next time they saw each other in the State House, the rival was incredibly warm to him. They ended up collaborating and actually became lifelong friends.
Okay, wait. I have to push back on this right away, because if I have a bitter enemy at work, like someone who is actively trying to sabotage my projects,
Yeah.
my absolute last instinct is to walk up to their desk and ask to borrow their prized possession. Doesn't that just make you look really needy or, incredibly annoying?
It definitely feels risky on the surface. I completely get that.
Yeah.
But if we look at the underlying psychological mechanics, it's actually a masterclass in influence.
Okay, how so?
Because it works through a mechanism called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is basically the severe mental discomfort we feel when our beliefs and our actions contradict each other.
Right, our brains absolutely hate that tension.
Hate it. So let's break down that tension in the Franklin story. The rival hates Franklin. That's the core belief.
Okay, got it. Rival hates Franklin.
But the rival just did Franklin a favor by lending him this rare, valuable book. That's the action.
Right.
So the brain looks at this situation and goes, wait a minute. I don't help my enemies. I only help people I actually like.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And to resolve that mental clash, the brain takes the path of least resistance. It can't undo the physical action of lending the book, right? That already happened.
So it has to rewrite the belief.
Exactly. The rival's internal narrative subtly shifts. It becomes, well, I lent him the book, so I must actually like him. He's a fellow intellectual. He's not so bad after all.
That is just wild. It's literally the brain hacking itself to fix a narrative glitch. But going back to my pushback, doesn't asking for help fundamentally make you look weak?
Well, not if you calibrate the request correctly. See, what Franklin did was a highly strategic, subtle form of flattery.
Flattery. How is asking for a book flattery?
Notice he didn't ask the rival for money. And he didn't ask him to do his chores. He asked for a rare book.
Ah, okay.
He signaled to the rival, I respect your intellect. I recognize that you possess something of high value and specific taste that I do not.
Right, so it levels the playing field.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It temporarily elevates the other person to this status of benefactor. And, people love feeling useful. They deeply love feeling respected for their expertise.
That actually makes a lot of sense. So think about a real-world scenario today. Like, you just moved into a new neighborhood. The standard playbook is what? You bake a batch of cookies and bring them over to the new neighbor.
Right, the classic bank account deposit we talked about.
Exactly. But what actually happens, you hand over the cookies, they say thank you, they close the door, the transaction is just over.
Yep.
You've established that you're a nice person who owns an oven, but you haven't really built a connection. But behavioral science suggests a better way is to go knock on the door and ask for a favor.
The classic example being asking to borrow a cup of sugar. Because by asking for that small favor, you initiate that cognitive dissonance.
Right.
The neighbor helps you, and their brain says, well, I'm going out of my way to help this new person, so I must like them.
See, I have to stop you there again, though, because if someone knocks on my door in 2026 asking for a cup of sugar, I'm not thinking, oh, I like this person. No. I'm thinking, this person doesn't have their life together, there is a grocery store a mile away, or, they could just use DoorDash. Like, how does this not completely backfire?
That is a completely fair point, and honestly, it highlights why the type of favor matters so much.
Right. You can't just ask for anything.
Exactly. Asking for something that makes you look incompetent will absolutely backfire. The modern equivalent of the sugar isn't about material need anymore. It's about local expertise.
Okay, so what's the modern version?
Instead of sugar, you knock on the door and say, hey, I just moved in, and I know you've lived here a while. Do you have a recommendation for a reliable local plumber or like a good takeout place?
Okay. I see. It's like, I value your local expertise.
Precisely. You are asking for a very small investment of their knowledge. It triggers the exact same cognitive dissonance and flattery as Franklin's rare book.
But it actually fits the modern context.
Yes, perfectly. Plus, you've now opened the door for them to comfortably ask you for a favor in the future. It creates this reciprocal loop of connection rather than a dead-end transaction like handing over cookies.
So if asking for a plumber recommendation gets you on good terms with the neighbor, how do we apply this to higher stakes situations?
You mean stealing it up?
Yeah. Like what happens when you need something massive, say in a formal business negotiation, or a scenario where you desperately need someone to comply with a major request?
Well, that naturally brings us to sequential request strategies. Once you know that a small ask builds a psychological bridge, you can start walking across that bridge.
Okay.
The first major technique we see in the behavioral science sources is called the foot in the door technique.
In the door.
Yeah, this is where you deliberately start with a very small, highly agreeable request. Once they say yes to that, you follow up later with a larger request, the one you actually wanted all along.
Oh, there's a classic study on this in our sources that just perfectly illustrates how bizarre human behavior can be.
The driving one.
Yes. So researchers went to a suburban neighborhood and asked homeowners to display this tiny, unobtrusive sign in their window that just said, "Be a safe driver."
It was basically a sticker.
Right, just a little sticker.
Oh,
Almost
that's-
everyone said yes, because, who is against safe driving?
Okay.
But then, a few weeks later, they went back to those exact same houses, and they asked if they could install a massive, exceptionally ugly billboard in their front yard that said, "Drive carefully."
And the results of that study are still staggering today.
Early.
Yeah, the people who had agreed to the tiny window sign were massively more likely to agree to the huge, ugly yard sign compared to a control group who were only ever asked about the yard sign out of the blue.
That's crazy. And this relies on Daryl Bem's self-perception theory, right? Can you explain how that actually works?
Sure. So self-perception theory argues that we figure out our own attitudes by observing our own behavior.
Kind of like cognitive dissonance.
Very similar, yeah.
Yeah.
When those homeowners agreed to put up the small sticker, they basically integrated a tiny new piece of identity into their self-image.
Like, I'm a safe driving advocate now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I am the kind of person who actively supports safe driving initiatives in my community. So when the massive billboard request came around, they wanted their actions to remain internally consistent with that new identity.
All right, so saying no would feel completely out of character.
Exactly.
Okay, but what if you don't have, 3 weeks to run a psychological long con on someone?
Fair point.
Like, what if you are in a negotiation right now, sitting across the table, and you need an answer today?
Well, then you use the exact opposite approach, which is honestly incredibly funny to me.
It's called the door-in-the-face technique, right?
It is, and it is incredibly powerful. Instead of starting small, you start outrageously large. You ask for something you know for an absolute fact will be rejected.
You want to get rejected.
Yes. You intentionally get the door slammed in your face.
Hmm.
Then you retreat to a more moderate request, which is what you actually wanted in the first place.
Oh, Robert Cialdini did a famous experiment on this in 1975.
The zoo trip study.
Yes, his team approached college students on campus and asked them to volunteer as counselors for juvenile delinquents.
Which is already a lot.
Right, but it was for 2 hours a week for 2 solid years, unpaid.
Unpaid. Just a massive commitment.
Naturally, almost everyone looked at them like they were crazy and said, absolutely not. But then the researchers immediately followed up with, okay, well, if you can't do that, would you be willing to chaperone a group of juvenile delinquents on a single 2-hour trip to the zoo?
And the compliance rate for the zoo trip just skyrocketed. It was far beyond the control group who were only ever asked about the zoo.
I really want to dissect the emotion of this because why does being rejected first make someone more likely to say yes to the second thing?
It's all about social tension.
Yeah, because if I think about being in that student's shoes, if someone asks me to give up my weekends for 2 years, I'm saying no. But I'm instantly feeling this spike of social tension. Like I just let them down. It's awkward.
That right there is the core emotional mechanism. It really comes down to two powerful human drivers, guilt and the norm of reciprocal concession.
Reciprocal concessions.
Yeah, when you drop your request from 2 years of grueling counseling down to a single fun zoo trip, the other person perceives that you've made a major concession. You back down.
Right.
And social norms dictate that when someone makes a concession for us, we are socially obligated to make a concession for them.
It's almost like someone asks you to lift a car. You say you obviously can't, and then they ask you to hold their jacket. You are so intensely relieved you aren't lifting a car that you just gladly take the jacket.
Even if you never really wanted to hold a jacket in the first place. That's a perfect analogy.
Oh.
Their concession is moving from no to yes on your smaller request. And that guilt you mentioned, the discomfort of saying no to the first charitable request, that fuels their desire to say yes to the second, just to alleviate the tension.
Just to restore their self-image as a helpful person.
Exactly.
And there's a fascinating layer to this in the sources involving something called metacommunication.
Yes, acknowledging the awkwardness.
Right. Researchers found that when you make that second request, if you simply acknowledge the awkwardness of the social boundary, compliance goes up even further. Like if you say, look, I know this is a lot to ask a stranger, or this is kind of awkward, but
People are way more likely to say yes.
why does stating the obvious work so well?
Because humans desperately want to avoid metacommunicative conflict. Like, we hate unspoken social weirdness.
We really do.
By calling out the elephant in the room yourself, you relieve the tension for both parties. You basically demonstrate that you understand the social rules, you aren't completely tone deaf, and that makes the other person feel safe enough to actually engage with your request.
I mean, hearing how easily people can be manipulated by a simple favor or a sudden drop in a request or by someone just saying, this is awkward, it kind of makes me incredibly paranoid.
I could see that.
If we possess these incredibly powerful psychological levers, creating cognitive dissonance, exploiting guilt, leveraging compliance, where is the line?
The ethical line.
Yeah, how do we use this step by step without becoming manipulative villains?
That is the most crucial distinction we can make today. The boundary between ethical persuasion and unethical manipulation really comes down to intent, mutual benefit, and transparency.
Okay, break that down.
So ethical influence relies on genuine connection. You are trying to find a win-win scenario where both parties walk away better off. Manipulation, on the other hand, is purely transactional and extractive. It's just about getting value from the other person at their direct expense.
Let's look at 2 real-world scenarios from our research to really hammer home this difference. Scenario A, ethical persuasion.
The teacher example.
Right. You have a middle school teacher dealing with a highly challenging, really disengaged group of students. The teacher pulls the most disruptive student aside and asks them to do a small favor, maybe distribute the day's worksheets or help set up the projector.
Which is a brilliant ethical use of the Ben Franklin effect.
Because it's low stakes?
Yes, the teacher is giving the student a low-stakes, safe way to build a positive connection. The student helps out, the cognitive dissonance kicks in, and the student's brain starts to view the teacher as an ally rather than an adversary.
It builds a sense of shared agency in the classroom.
Exactly. The student benefits by feeling valued and trusted, and the teacher benefits by gaining a calmer, more cooperative environment. It's a true win-win.
Okay, now scenario B, unethical manipulation. A salesperson at a dealership knows a specific, really expensive car is totally wrong for a customer's budget and lifestyle.
Right. Bad fit all around.
But the salesperson asks the customer to do them a, quote, small personal favor by filling out a really long, tedious feedback survey while they wait.
The trap.
Yeah, the customer invests the time and does it. Then the salesperson pivots, using that customer's newfound sense of investment and the foot-in-the-door momentum to guilt them into buying the terrible, overpriced car.
That is textbook manipulation. The salesperson manufactured the initial favor solely to trap the customer. There's no genuine connection being built there, and the final outcome actively harms the customer's financial well-being.
So if we are applying this step-by-step guide in our own daily lives, how do we make absolutely sure we are staying on the ethical side of the line, even unintentionally?
The golden rule here is transparency. Always. Always give the person an out.
An out? Like what?
Like when you ask for a favor, whether it's big or small, you have to use phrases like, no pressure at all. Or, if you're too busy right now, I completely understand.
Why does that specific phrasing matter so much?
Because it actively prevents something called psychological reactance.
Reactance.
Yeah, reactance is a hardwired human tendency to violently rebel whenever we feel our freedom of choice is being threatened or restricted.
Oh, like when someone tells you to do something you were already going to do and suddenly you don't want to do it anymore?
Exactly. If someone feels cornered or socially pressured into doing a favor, they're not going to experience cognitive dissonance and end up liking you. They're just going to deeply resent you.
That makes total sense.
By giving them a clear, guilt-free exit, their choice to help you remains entirely voluntary. And voluntary action is an absolute requirement for the psychology of connection to work positively.
We also really need to talk about cultural nuance here, because we can't assume these psychological rules apply the exact same way globally.
Definitely not.
Our sources get into this concept of relational mobility, which makes this very clear. The data contrasts high relational mobility societies, like the US, with low relational mobility societies, like Japan.
That is such a vital piece of context. Relational mobility refers to how easy it is to form new relationships and leave old ones in a given society.
Right.
So in the U.S., which has high relational mobility, offering or asking for help from complete strangers is relatively common. It's often rewarded. It's an environment that really champions personal agency.
Like you can ask a stranger for directions in New York and both of you walk away feeling pretty good about the interaction.
Exactly. But in a society like Japan.
Right. Japan is a lower relational mobility society.
Yes, one that heavily prioritizes group harmony, what psychologists call an adjustment goal. So in that context, asking for a favor or intervening with a stranger requires much more careful deliberation.
Because you don't want to accidentally disrupt the social fabric.
Precisely. You don't want to impose an unwanted burden or cause someone to lose face.
Right. So ethical influence really means deeply respecting those cultural boundaries. You can't just travel the world stumbling around demanding favors from people and expect everyone to instantly fall in love with you.
You really can't.
You have to read the room and understand the societal rules of engagement.
Context is everything. If you ignore the cultural context, your attempt at building rapport will instantly be read as arrogance.
Okay, so we've established the rules. We know how the mechanics work, and we know how to use them ethically and contextually. Let's look at the dark side of this.
Let's do it.
What happens when someone is actively ignoring all of those ethical boundaries and they're using these techniques on us unethically? How do we build our defensive strategies?
The absolute best defense is awareness. When you can spot the matrix, you can step out of it. For example, when you recognize a door-in-the-face tactic being deployed against you. Say someone asks for something absurdly huge. You say no, and they immediately smoothly pivot to a smaller request.
Right, the zoo trip pivot.
Yes, the simplest defense is to graciously but firmly refuse the second request as well.
But I'll be honest, that is so hard in the moment. The guilt we talked about earlier is so heavy.
Oh, it really is.
Like, the social pressure to meet them in the middle when they drop their request is intense. How do you decline gracefully without feeling like a terrible person?
Well, the trick is realizing that the feeling of guilt you're experiencing has been artificially manufactured.
Artificially?
Yes, it's not organic. Recognizing the tactic allows you to separate your genuine feelings from the engineered psychological pressure.
So what do you actually say?
You can simply say, I can't commit to that either, but I really appreciate you asking.
Wow, just clean and simple.
And by actively naming the tactic in your own head, like saying to yourself, oh, they're trying the door in the face on me right now.
Yeah.
You strip it of its emotional power. You effectively stop their foot from getting in your door.
Okay, But what about a really tricky, highly realistic scenario?
I'm listening.
What if you are in a situation where you literally have to do the favor?
Ah,
Let's say you have a highly toxic boss or like a remarkably manipulative colleague.
yeah.
They ask you for a favor that is technically part of your job description, or maybe saying no would literally ruin your career trajectory. You just cannot refuse.
This is where the psychology gets incredibly interesting and honestly a bit dangerous for your mental health.
How so?
If you are forced to do the favor, you are at risk of the Ben Franklin effect happening to you.
Oh no.
Yeah. Your brain will experience the cognitive dissonance of helping this toxic person. And to resolve that uncomfortable tension, your brain might slowly try to trick you into thinking, well, I keep working late for my boss. Maybe they aren't so bad. Maybe I actually like them.
Maybe their demands are reasonable.
Exactly.
That is terrifying. You essentially end up rationalizing their toxic behavior and lowering your own standards just to make your own actions make sense. It's like you desperately need a mental firewall to protect your own reality.
Mental firewalling is the perfect way to describe the solution. Behavioral psychologists suggest a specific debiasing technique for this exact scenario.
What's the technique?
Well, since cognitive dissonance relies on a lack of external justification, meaning your brain is desperately searching for a reason why you did the favor, you have to forcefully provide your brain with a different, highly logical justification.
So you consciously tell yourself exactly why you are doing it.
Precisely. You actively, internally narrate the reality of the situation to yourself. You say in your head, I am doing this favor because I need my paycheck to pay my rent, and I want to maintain a professional reputation at this company.
I'm absolutely not doing this because I like or respect this person.
Yes, exactly.
I love that. By giving your brain a concrete, rational, external reason for the action, you completely short-circuit the dissonance. The brain doesn't have to rewrite your feelings toward the toxic boss because the action of helping them is already fully explained by your need for a paycheck.
You protect your own perception of reality. You preserve your boundaries.
That is so smart.
It allows you to be professional, polite, and compliant on the outside while remaining entirely unmanipulated and clear-headed on the inside.
That is incredibly empowering. It really takes the mystery out of manipulation. Okay, let's pull all of this together because we've covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started by looking at how the old bank account ledger of relationships is fundamentally flawed, and how surprisingly, asking a rival for a small, flattering favor, like Ben Franklin did with his rare book, can actually spark a friendship by hacking cognitive dissonance.
We then explored how to scale those small social interactions into formal negotiations using foot in the door and door in the face techniques.
Right.
We saw how people have a deep desire for internal consistency and how they are powerfully driven by guilt and reciprocal concessions.
And we drew a very hard line between ethical persuasion, which always seeks mutual benefit and provides a transparent out to avoid reactance, and unethical manipulation, which is just purely extractive.
Yes.
We also touched on how cultural context, like relational mobility, completely changes the rules of engagement. And finally, we looked at how to build mental firewalls against those who would use these tactics against us, basically short-circuiting their influence by consciously narrating our own motives.
It really is a comprehensive, step-by-step toolkit for navigating human interactions and understanding why we do the things we do.
It is. And to wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
We've spent this entire time talking about how cognitive dissonance can fundamentally change your feelings toward other people.
Right.
Doing a favor for someone makes you like them more. But what happens if we point this exact same mechanism inward?
That is such a fascinating application of the research. If performing a favor for someone changes your narrative about them, what if you start doing deliberate, small favors for your future self?
Exactly. Think about it. Something as simple as prepping your coffee maker the night before, or laying out your workout clothes, or finally taking 10 minutes to organize that one messy drawer.
Right.
When you wake up the next morning and see that your past self did you a solid favor, does the exact same psychological mechanism kick in? Can you literally trick your own brain into liking and respecting yourself a little bit more just by being your own benefactor? Think about it. See you next time on The Deep Dive.